let's get into the report that is available digitally, but we also have the book here with us. And let's look upon some of the really highlights and some of the top findings of the statistics now. So this was the second highest number of installation ever being measured. So we were, for the third year in a row, over 500,000 of new installed industrial robots around the world. That meant 441,000 new robots in the world. And that gives us a CAGR for the last 5 years of plus 5%. And the robot stock, so how many robots are out there in production, so to say, went over 4 million for the first time with 4.3 million. And that was also a growth with double digit of 10%. So if we look again a little bit more in the figures of robot stock, or the robot population, maybe we should call it, it has grown significantly, of course, since 2013 and is now on 4.3 million. And the growth this year was 10%, but the CAGR for the last year has been a 12% growth. Then looking into then how many robots are really installed, and there we have now again over 500,000. And you can see if we just look back 10 years back in time, which is not such a long time, this figure has triplicated. So from 178,000 up to what we now have, 541. And despite that we had a rather flattish year, 2023, we went down with 2%. The trend over the last, since 2018, is a CAGR of 5%. So also here, a very strong growth the last years in that part. Then let's look upon a little bit where are the robots being used. And also here we have some top findings for this year. The last 3 years, the electrical and electronicals area has been the ones where most robots were installed. This changed, and actually it was automotive who had the top position this year. That was also how it used to be years earlier, but now automotive is the number one. Automotive industry did though not grow. It was more or less the same amount of installed robot, and totally the automotive industry represents about 25% of the installations. This is very closely followed down by the electronics, that is about 23% of the market, but electronics had a rather challenging year with a decline of 20% in 2023. Just as much as electrical and electronics grew or shrank, the metal and machinery actually grew with 16% and is then representing about 14% of the market. And then we have plastics, chemical, foods with 4 respective 3% here. Then you have a big group of all others, which means a lot of different industries that are starting their automation journey and the robotics journey. So let's also have a little bit of looking back 10 years, how it looked like. And if you just look upon the market 10 years ago, the automotive industry used to be almost half of it, 45%. And the electrical electronics was 24%. And the general industry, if you bundled all the other ones together, was about 30%. This has changed really over the last 10 years. So automotive is now 30%, electronic at 28%, but the general industry is over 40%. And this is a strong indication, and we will see it more in the trends, that more and more different sectors and segments start the automation journey, starts to put in robots in all different types of application and in all different parts of the world. So this is also a trend we have seen very strongly the last year, and that we anticipate becoming even stronger going forward. Then let's look upon something that hasn't changed that much, and that is actually where are robots really being used. And if we look upon that, we see that the machine handling is the number one application, and it has been the number one application since we started measuring it, and it continues to be the strongest one, had a growth of 5%, very closely followed by welding, that also was growing with about 5%. Then assembly, clean room, dispensing had a bit more of a challenging year with decline, while processing stayed a bit the same. So also here, despite that, we see robots in a lot of new sectors and a lot of geographies, what they're being used for, which applications stay pretty stable. Then let's put focus to another really interesting growing area, which are the so-called cobots, the collaborative robots. Since 2017, we are following their development very much in detail. And 2017, they were less than 3% of the market. And that has been growing very, very rapidly, and with growth rates between the years now between 10 and up to 70%. And last year they reached 10% of the market, but last year with 2023 figures now was the first time where they stabilized out. So it's had also a decline of 2%, more or less exactly the same as all the robot installations, but is now 10% of the market. And we've seen particularly that the cobots has not taken market from the more traditional robots, but have extended the market. And also here, due to many new sectors and segments are starting to use robots and using them in very many different ways. So if we look upon the picture of it, it's 90% of the traditional industrial robots and 10% cobots that we can observe so far. Then let's also look upon the geographical spread. And also here you can see that the Asian and Australian area has grown very quickly and is also the largest part here. But in 2023, we also saw here a small decline. So it's now under 400,000, but on 380,000. Europe, though, saw an increase of over 90,000, and thirdly, the Americas, that is about 55,000. Then taking the just in percentage means that over 70% of all the robots installed are in the Asia and Australia area, followed then by Europe with 70%, and then Americas with 11%. And breaking this down more into a country view, that means that the top 5 countries, they are having almost 80% of the market. So almost 80% of everything installed is in the top 5 markets. This is also something that had been stable for a long time, with China being number 1, and China having more than half of the installations. So 51% of all robots installed in 23 were installed in China, followed then by Japan, and then US, Korea, and Germany. All of them showing a little bit of a decline, except in Germany, there we had a growth, which was completely opposite than last year. Then we have more of a growth in the 4 other countries, and Germany a small decline. And if we look upon the top 15 countries, also this list stays pretty stable and the figures stay more or less the same here. The only difference here, we see UK now and not Singapore, but the difference in number of robots are very close. So also this one is pretty stable. But let us drill down a little bit more in each of the countries, and I'll hand over to you, Christoph.
Thank you, Marina. Let's start with China as the major market. 51% we just heard of the robots, or in other words, for every robot installed somewhere in the world, there's also another robot installed in China. And if we have a look at the sheer number, we see a -5%, but we also see the second highest level, the second highest installation count ever recorded in our statistics history. But even more notable, what we see and what our data allows us to show is the difference between domestic suppliers, Chinese companies in the Chinese market, and all other global suppliers in the Chinese market. And there we can see that the share of Chinese suppliers in this market rapidly increased over the past years. It used to be below or around 30% in the past, and now it reached 47%. So almost half of the robots are domestic production. On the right-hand side panel, we can see the ranking of customer industries. And what we can see here is that electronics is the major customer and has been the major customer in China, followed by automotive. And what we can also see is the replicant of the global picture, that electronics had a difficult year installing substantially fewer robots, which of course drives the overall result for China. The next market that we want to have a look at is Japan. Japan is a historically grown, very mature market for robots. It has a very developed industry, very developed also robot stock. And it is now seeking new impetus for additional market growth. And that's what we can see over time on the left-hand side panel. We see there was a peak in 2018 at 55,000 units. And overall, after that, the market was a little bit up and down following business cycles, and it's more or less moving sideways, and the growth rate that you compute, of course, depends on the base year that you choose. If we use a CAGR from 2018, it will be negative. If we would compute a CAGR from 2017, it would be 0. So it's more or less a sideways trend that we see here. And again, we see electronics is the major customer industry, accounting for most installations, which explains the total result with a -9%, followed by automotive and metal and machinery as the major share of robot installations. The next region that we want to investigate a little bit closer is the United States. Here, we also have a high level of installations. It's not a record-setting level, but it is still the third highest level that we ever recorded in our statistics. On the left-hand side panel, you can also see this more or less sideways trend, but overall, there is a growth tendency here visible. On the right-hand side panel, you can see the dependence on demand from the automotive industry, which is still by far the largest customer industry, followed by metal and machinery, electronics only in third. Part of the volatility in installations is, of course, because North America or the United States automotive industry, they have production sites in Mexico, in Canada. So if the choice is made for an installation or for a new site or capacity expansion in Mexico or Canada, it has an impact on installations in the US, but it's still in the region of North America. The next market that we want to have a look at is Korea. Korea shows a remarkable sideways trend, more or less since 2019, 2020. Installations remained pretty much constant at 31,000 units. The electronics industry is by far the largest customer, so we usually split it down and segment out, for instance, electronic components and devices here. Automotive is also very strong in Korea, so this makes it a perfect market for robotics. The main customer industries are very strong there. This is something that should also account for some future potential, but so far the market has been stagnant over the past few years. Germany, we already heard, had an interesting trend opposing the overall or the general trend. And there's a simple explanation. After the COVID pandemic, there were a lot of shakeups in the supply chains, and many projects were put on hold, could not be completed. And there was a huge order intake in 2021 and 2022. But the final installation and completion of the project was in the first half of 2023. And this is what is visible in this data. And it is also something we will refer to in when we talk about the forecast in a few slides. The main customer in Germany is still the automotive industry, followed by metal and machinery. Electronics here only ranks fourth. Pardon. Yes, let's talk about trends and forecasts. We assume or we compute, and from all the information that we collect, our forecast that we will have a rather flattish year, 2024, remaining at 541,000 units, more or less. But what we observe is a very divergent development globally. There are some countries benefiting, others and having growth, others declining a little bit, and there are various reasons for that. What we can say in general is the overall investment climate seems to be a little bit challenging. We hope that this will dissolve in the next few years and that installations will accelerate again. Let's break it a little bit down to tell you more about the reasons for our forecast in the different regions. So for Asia, we hear reports also from our partner associations that they expect the market to slightly accelerate this year and to accelerate further over the next few years. So this weakness that we just observed in recent time has bottomed out, and installations are going to grow again. In Europe, we have a little bit of a different situation. So first of all, in examples like Germany, we have a baseline effect. That is, in 2023, the numbers were particularly high. So even if we return to a level of 2022, it would mean a minus of several percent just because of that baseline effect. Also, we have several support programs running out. And what we observed was that investments or orders were made earlier to take benefit of these support programs. Some of them were implemented during the COVID pandemic to support the economy. And in most countries in Europe, the funds are now being taken, or the programs just run out because they have a time limit. And this is why we expect that 2024 will see a minus 11% in Europe. In the United States, the signs are a little bit ambiguous at the moment. In our order intake survey, we see that order intake is declining, but the assessment of the members in our forecast survey was rather positive. So the forecast here is plus 6% as of now. And there are, of course, also support programs that, like the Inflation Reduction Act, that still work to the positive side and promote installation of production capacity in the United States. Having said this, I would like to hand over again to Marina for some more market determinants.
Okay. So, of course, the market is a bit unpredictable, and there is also various headwinds that we see also that makes holding back some investments still being there. But we expect then the rebound of demand really to come back from the especially electronics industry, and also that the global economic growth to stabilize there. And so what we can see now, and what if we look upon other reports, is that the demand of order intake has bottomed out right now, and that's based on our IFR quarterly survey. But let's look in a little bit to the more long-term trend where the robotics industry is going. And there is particularly 5 trends that I'd like to highlight there. The first one, I think most industries would highlight, but it's particularly interesting for robotics, which is the AI and machine learning. And what we're seeing now with robotics together with AI particularly opens up really new type of application and new type of usages for robots. So this will really put the fundament for the next step of how robotics is being used in more or less all different types of sector that it is today. The other one is cobots. As I said, cobots is now 10% of the complete market, and we've seen different types of usage of cobots, and particularly in new applications. And welding has come very much lately, but we also see cobots coming up in new applications as the technology matures. Another one more new is the mobile manipulators, having an AMMR and putting a robotic arm on it and making sure that this can move around, especially in a production or logistic sites. Also here, lots of technology movement, and especially in the logistic areas, we're seeing a lot of new applications here. Then digital twin, maybe not something completely new, but having so much robots, especially in manufacturing, means that the robots also need to be integrated in the digital environment of the factory. And that both for planning purposes, to do simulations before the robots are installed, but even more important for optimization during the operation of it and having the robots completely included in the digital setup of the factory. And then finally, which I also think nobody could not have missed to notice, is all the development on humanoids. And also here we see a lot of technology development of how humanoids are developing, and looking forward and see exciting ways of using the humanoids in different applications. So the three main technology trends are the mobile manipulators then, and also the new use cases around here. And really, when we look upon transportation and in the logistic areas, the research of development around humanoids, how to use them, and the technology around them themselves. And then, of course, the very, very exciting movements with artificial intelligence together with robotics. And finally, then also some of the market trends, they stay very much the same. The labor shortage we've talked about for many, many years, and we see it very clearly. And that is also, in order for economies to develop, a higher degree of automation is needed and will continue to be very much of a critical factor going forward. We also see, which was a strong trend after COVID that continues, this is the nearshoring, the location both of supply chains and production closer to the demand and the consumption. And then also, as we saw before, the general industry is growing a lot. So small and medium-sized enterprises really starting their automation journey and starting to use robots in a new way as before. And also here as IFR, we have tried to support this development with our campaign Go for Robotics, which is trying to support especially SMEs with information and knowledge about how to take your first step in the automation journey. Where should I start? How do I start? Where do I need to think about? This is also something we will continue to support.
Thank you very much to all the three panelists. Press information, in case you haven't received the information yet, the press information is active on the website. You can also download the presentations. And of course, if any questions come up into your mind after this press conference, after the closing of the press conference, you can send them to press@ifr.org for further information.